Let me tell you something I've never told anyone outside my own family. I was there. I saw it happen. I was standing maybe 40 meters away when the whole thing started, close enough that I could see her face, close enough that years later I still wake up sometimes and remember exactly how she looked in that first minute. People ask me about it all the time now. They want the dramatic version, the one they show on the news feeds, the one with the slow music and the big reveal. But that's not how it felt when you were standing in it. When you were standing in it, it just felt small, quiet, almost boring. That's the thing nobody tells you about history. When it happens right in front of you, it doesn't announce itself. It just walks in through the front gate wearing a borrowed jacket and looking a little lost. So let me start at the beginning, the real beginning. My name doesn't matter much for this story, but you can call me Vare. I was a third-year cadet at the Koruvian Joint Academy of Stellar Defense. Everybody just called it the Academy, like there was only one in the whole galaxy, which there sort of was, in the way that mattered. It sat on a moon called Thuris, which orbited a gas giant the color of old bruises, and from the dormitory windows you could watch storms the size of continents roll across that planet's face for days and never finish. The Academy was where the best went. I don't say that to brag, because honestly I was middle of my class at best. I say it so you understand what kind of place it was. Every species in the Koruvian compact that could fly a ship and hold a thought sent their finest young people to Thuris. There were the Valen, tall and feathered and proud, who could see in the dark and never seemed to need sleep. There were the Kor, four-armed and stone-skinned, who could break a steel bar with one hand but cried at music. There were the Selith, who breathed a different air than the rest of us and walked around in those soft pressure suits that hummed faintly when they moved, and 100 others. Beings from worlds I'd never see, all packed into the same gray halls, all trying to be the thing their planets needed them to be. There were no humans. I want you to understand that because it's important. In 3 years at the Academy, in all the briefings and all the history feeds, I had heard the word human maybe twice, and both times it was the way you'd mention a ghost story. Something old, something dangerous and far away and best left alone. The compact had rules about the human worlds. You didn't go there. You didn't trade there. There was a quarantine that was older than my grandmother, drawn up after some war nobody talked about. A war that the official records described with so little detail that it might as well have not existed. We knew 3 things about humans, and we knew them the way kids know scary rhymes. 1, they came from a small water world out past the Veil, a region of space the compact charts marked simply as restricted. 2, a long time ago the compact tried to bring them in, the way you'd bring in any new species, and something went wrong, badly wrong. 3, after that the compact decided the safest thing was to leave them alone, forever, no contact, no exceptions. That was it. That was all I knew about humans on the morning everything changed. So you can imagine my face when the new cadet walked in. It was the start of the spring intake, which on Thuris doesn't mean anything except that the gas giant had finished one of its long, slow turns, and the Academy administrators liked to pretend the calendar mattered. We were standing in the receiving hall, all of us third years assigned to mentor duty, which mostly meant standing in a line looking official while the first years filed past with their luggage and their nervous faces. The receiving hall was huge. I always loved it, honestly. The ceiling went up so high it had its own weather, a faint mist near the top that the lights caught and turned gold. The floor was that black Koruvian stone that looked wet but never was, polished by 10,000 boots until you could see the gold ceiling reflected in it like a second sky beneath your feet. There was a smell to that hall, recycled air metal, the faint sweetness of the cleaning gel they used. To this day, if I smell that gel anywhere, I'm right back there, 18 years old, bored, shifting my weight from foot to foot. The new cadets came in groups, sorted by transport. Valen first, then a cluster of Kor, then some Selith in their humming suits. Standard stuff. We'd done this a dozen times. Half of us weren't even really watching anymore. Then the doors at the far end opened again and a single figure walked through, and the whole hall just stopped. Not all at once. It was more like a wave. The cadets nearest the door noticed first, and you could see the silence spread outward from them, person by person, like ripples on water. By the time it reached where I was standing, I didn't even know what I was looking at. I just knew that everyone around me had gone quiet, and that quiet has a weight to it, a pressure, and I turned to look the way you turn when a room changes behind you. And there she was. She was small. That was the first thing. Smaller than almost everyone in the hall, a head shorter than the Valen, maybe 2 heads shorter than the core. She had skin a warm brown color and dark hair tied back roughly like she'd done it in a hurry. She wore a plain gray jacket that didn't fit her right, too big in the shoulders, and she carried a single bag over one arm. No entourage. No transport markings on her clothes. Nothing to tell you what world she came from. But it wasn't her clothes that made the hall go silent. It was her face. Or rather, it was the wrongness of her face. I didn't have the word for it then. I just knew, in some old animal part of my brain, that I had never seen anything like her before. She had 2 eyes front-facing like a predator. Most species in the compact have eyes on the sides or more than 2 or eyes that glow. Hers were small and brown and turned forward, fixed and steady, and when they swept across the room they didn't dart and flicker the way prey eyes do. They moved slowly, deliberately, like she was deciding where to look. She stood differently too, balanced on 2 legs with this loose, easy readiness, weight slightly forward, hands relaxed at her sides but somehow not relaxed at all. I'd seen combat instructors stand like that. I had never seen a first-year stand like that. The core beside me, a big quiet fellow named Drent who I'd shared a few classes with, leaned down and whispered, "What is that?" "I don't know," I said, and I didn't. She walked the length of the hall in total silence, every eye on her. And you could tell she felt it, all of it, the weight of 1,000 stairs, and you could tell it didn't move her one bit. She just walked, slow and even, to the registration desk at the center of the hall, set her bag down and waited. The registrar was a Valen named Officer Saul, an old bird with gray in her feathers and a voice like dry paper. I'd had her for orientation. She was the kind of administrator who'd seen everything and was bored by all of it. Nothing rattled Saul. The new girl rattled Saul. I watched the old Valen look up from her console and I watched her freeze. Just for a second. Just a flicker. But I knew Saul and I had never seen her freeze before. Her feathers did something, a tiny ripple along the back of her neck, a thing Valen do when they're afraid and trying not to show it. Then she recovered, cleared her throat, tapped her console. "Name and origin," Saul said. The new girl spoke, and her voice, I'll never forget her voice. It was low and even and a little rough, and she spoke the compact trade tongue with a strange flat accent none of us had ever heard. "Aru Sennan," she said, "origin classified." Classified. Now you have to understand, nobody's origin is classified. That's not a thing. Your origin world is the first thing anybody knows about you. It's how you get sorted, fed, housed, taught. The whole academy runs on knowing where everyone is from. I had never once heard a cadet say the word classified about their own origin, and from the way the silence in the hall deepened, neither had anyone else. Saul stared at her console for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, "I have a flagged admission here, special authority, compact council seal." She looked up at the girl. "You have a sponsor at the highest level." "I know," Aru Sennan said. "Do you know who?" "No," the girl said. "I was told to come here, so I came." And then she picked up her bag and looked around the silent hall at all of us staring at her, and she did the strangest thing. She smiled. Just a small, tired, almost embarrassed smile. Like she was sorry for the trouble. Like she knew exactly how strange she was and wished she weren't. "Hi," she said to no one and everyone. "Sorry, long trip." Nobody answered. 1,000 cadets from 100 worlds, and not one of us could think of a single thing to say. That was the day the human came to the academy. Though of course, none of us knew yet that she was human. That part came later. That part is the whole story. I should tell you that nobody believed she'd last. The first week, that's all anyone talked about. In the mess halls, in the dorm corridors, in the training yards, Aru Sennan, the girl with no origin. The rumors started immediately and they were all stupid. She was a spy. She was a council brat being hidden from an assassination plot. She was some kind of experiment, a bioengineered soldier, a thing grown in a tank somewhere. The Seleth cadets were sure she was a contagion risk and stayed 3 meters away from her for a month. The Valen decided she was beneath them and ignored her, which is the worst thing a Valen can do to you. Me, I just watched. I had this seat in the second mess hall, up on the mezzanine level, where I'd go to eat alone and read because I was a quiet kid and the crowds gave me headaches. From up there, I could see the whole floor. And every day I watched Aru Sennan come in, get her food. She ate everything, by the way, anything they put in front of her, which freaked people out because most species can only eat their own world's food without medication, and then sit alone at the end of a long, empty table. Always the same table, always alone. She never looked lonely, though. That was the strange part. She'd eat and she'd watch the room the way she watched everything, slow and steady, those forward eyes moving from group to group, taking it in, learning it. You could almost see her filing things away. People tried to scare her. Of course they did. You put 1,000 competitive young soldiers in a building and someone's going to test the new kid. There was a group of corps cadets, big ones, older, who decided that Aru Sennan was an insult to the academy's standards. Their leader was a fellow named Vasuk, broad as a doorway, with that gray stone skin and a chip on his shoulder the size of a moon. Vasuk had washed out of the elite combat track twice and was bitter about it. And bitter people always need someone smaller to feel big next to. I watched it happen. Third day, I think. Aru was carrying her tray across the floor and Vasuk just stepped into her path, loomed over her. 4 arms crossed, all of them, which is the core way of saying I could break you. The whole hall went quiet again. It did that a lot around her. You're in my hall, no origin, Vasuk said, loud so everyone could hear. Things in my hall need an origin. Where are you from? And Aru Sennan looked up at him, all the way up because he was enormous, and she didn't flinch. She didn't step back. She just held that tray steady as a rock, and she looked at him with those calm brown eyes, and after a moment she said, "Somewhere you've never been." That's all, somewhere you've never been. Quiet, almost gentle. I swear the temperature in that hall dropped. Vasuk didn't know what to do with it. He was used to people getting scared or getting angry, and she'd given him neither. He stood there a second too long, and you could see him losing, see the whole hall watching him lose, and finally he did the thing bullies do when they've got nothing. He knocked her tray out of her hands. It hit the floor and the food went everywhere, and the clatter of it echoed all the way up to where I sat. And here's the part I think about. Here's the part that told me she was something else. She didn't react. She looked down at the food on the floor. Then she looked back up at Vasuk, and she smiled that same small, tired, almost sorry smile she'd given the whole hall on the first day. And she said, "Okay." Just okay. Like he'd answered a question for her. Like she'd learned exactly what she needed to know about him and was a little disappointed it was so simple. Then she crouched down, calm as anything, and started picking up the food with her bare hands, cleaning up the mess he'd made. And the strangest thing happened. Vasuk, this mountain of a core, just backed away from her. Couldn't get away fast enough. Took his friends and left the hall. And nobody could say why exactly, but everybody felt it. He'd lost. He'd lost so badly that he had to flee, and he didn't even understand how. I started watching her a lot more carefully after that. The classes broke them, usually. That's what I should explain. The academy was famous for its first 6 weeks, which everyone called the grinding. They threw everything at you at once: physical conditioning, zero-G combat, ship systems, tactical theory, exobiology, the works. The dropout rate in the first 6 weeks was nearly 40%. They did it on purpose. The galaxy didn't need soldiers who quit, so they made you quit early if you were going to. Aru Sennan should have washed out in the first week. By every measure that mattered, she was the worst equipped cadet in the entire intake. She had no enhanced senses. She couldn't see in the dark like the Valen. She had only 2 arms, not 4 like the Core. She didn't have the Selith's resistance to pressure or the natural armor of half a dozen other species. She was slow, well. I thought she was slow at first. We all did. On paper, she was a frail little 2-armed, 2-eyed thing from a classified world, and the smart money said she'd be gone before the first month was out. The smart money was wrong. I remember the first time I really understood. It was the endurance trials 3rd week. They marched the whole intake out to the equatorial training grounds, a brutal stretch of broken rock and thin air under the bruise-colored light of the gas giant, and they ran us. Just ran us. Up the ridges, down into the gullies, over the rubble fields, again and again, hour after hour with full packs and no rest. The point was to find out who'd break. The Valen loved it at first. They've got hollow bones and big lungs, and they bounded ahead like they were flying. The Core were slower but unstoppable, just grinding forward on those stone legs. The Selith struggled, the thin air was hard on them, and a few of them dropped out in the first hours, which surprised everyone. And then there was Aru Sennan. She started slow, way back in the pack, and I remember thinking, here it is, here's where the no-origin girl finally breaks. I was running near her. I wasn't fast either, like I said, and I watched her settle into this steady, even, unhurried pace. Not fast, but she never stopped. Not once. The hours went on. The light shifted as the gas giant turned. The fast ones started to flag. The Valen who'd shot ahead began to wilt. Their bodies are built for sprints, not slogs, and by the 4th hour they were stumbling. The Core kept grinding, but you could see it costing them. Cadets were dropping all over the field, sitting down in the rocks, getting hauled off by the medics. And Aru Sennan just kept going. Same pace, same steady breathing. Her face was wet and red, and she looked like she was suffering. That was the thing, she clearly was suffering. Every step looked like it hurt, but she would not stop. Hour 5, hour 6. The fast ones were all behind her now, broken, and she was passing them one by one, never speeding up, just never, ever stopping. I had to drop out at hour 7. Sat down in the rocks with my chest on fire and watched her go past me, and I'll never forget it. She didn't even look fast. She looked like she was barely moving. But everyone else had stopped, and she hadn't, and that turned out to be the only thing that mattered. She finished the trial. First. By a margin so wide the instructors checked the timing equipment twice because they didn't believe it. One of the combat instructors, an old Core named Master Tej who'd seen 40 intakes come and go, was standing at the finish marker when she came in. I was close enough to hear him. He looked at this small, wet, exhausted girl who just outlasted 1,000 of the galaxy's finest, and he said almost to himself, "What are you?" And Aru Sennan, gasping, hands on her knees, looked up at him and managed that little smile and said, "Tired, I'm really tired." Master Tej laughed. First time I ever heard him laugh. And from that day on, he watched her the way I did. Like she was a puzzle. Like she was the answer to a question he'd been afraid to ask. Here's what I figured out slowly, watching her over those first weeks. And I want to explain it carefully because it's the heart of the whole thing. Aru Sennan wasn't stronger than the rest of us. She wasn't faster. She didn't have better eyes or more arms or thicker skin. By every single individual measure, she was worse. But she didn't break. That was the thing none of us understood at first because none of us had ever seen it. Every species in the compact has limits, and we all know our limits, and when we hit them, we stop. That's just sense. That's survival. A Valen who runs too far will damage its heart, so it stops. A Core who lifts too much will tear its muscles, so it stops. We are all built to know when to quit, because quitting keeps you alive. Aru Sennan didn't have that. Or she had it, but she'd somehow learned to ignore it. She'd push past the point where any sane being would stop, and she'd keep pushing, and the wall that should have broken her just bent. And then she'd push past that too. I saw it again and again. In the cold trials where they exposed us to dropping temperatures, she went numb and gray and kept functioning long after she should have shut down. In the pain conditioning, where they tested how you'd perform while hurt, she gritted her teeth and kept her hands steady when other cadets were screaming. In the sleep deprivation drills, she went 70 hours and was still thinking clearly at the end of it, slow but clear, while cadets all around her were hallucinating and falling down. She wasn't superior. She was relentless, and it turns out relentless beats superior almost every time if you give it long enough. There was a phrase that started going around the academy about her, whispered, half joking, half scared. The Corps started it, I think. They'd say it in the training yards when she did something that shouldn't have been possible. She doesn't know when to stop. They meant it as an insult at first, like she was too stupid to know her limits, but it stopped sounding like an insult pretty fast. It started sounding like a warning. I finally talked to her in the 8th week. I'd like to say I did it out of courage, but the truth is it was an accident. I was in the equipment bay late at night, fixing a strap on my gear that had torn during drills, and she was there too, alone, working on something at the far bench. I almost left. I almost just turned around and went back to the dorms rather than be alone in a room with the strange girl everyone was afraid of. But she looked up and saw me, and it would have been rude to leave, so I stayed. We worked in silence for a while. Then she said without looking up, "You're the one who watches." It startled me. What? "From the mezzanine," she said. "In the second mess hall, you sit up there and watch everyone. You've been watching me." She said it without any accusation, just a fact. "Sorry," I said. "I didn't mean." "It's fine." She looked up and gave me that small smile. "It's smart. You learn a lot watching. Most people don't. Most people are too busy being looked at to look." She went back to her work. "What's your name?" "Vayer." Aru, like I didn't know. Like the whole galaxy didn't know by now. I don't know what made me ask it. I think I'd been holding the question so long it just fell out. "Where are you actually from?" Her hands went still on the bench. For a second I thought I'd ruined it, that she'd shut down and leave, and I'd never get to talk to her again. But she didn't. She just stayed still for a long moment thinking, and then she said something I've never forgotten. "You ever feel like you don't belong somewhere," she said, "and then realize that's exactly why you got sent there, because you didn't belong anywhere else either." I didn't know what to say to that. "I'm from a long way away," she said. "Further than the charts go. They didn't want me. Where I'm from, I mean, I was," she stopped, chose her words. "I was too much for them, too stubborn, too hard to control, so they sent me here, sent me to the place that takes the hard ones and makes them into soldiers. I think they hoped I'd either become useful or get myself killed. Either way, they'd be rid of me." "That's awful," I said. She shrugged. "It's honest, at least. Most people aren't even that." She looked at me, and for just a moment the calm slipped and I saw something underneath it, something tired and old and a little sad, something that had been carrying a heavy thing for a long, long way. "Can I tell you something, Vayer, since you watch everything anyway?" "Okay." "They're going to find out what I am," she said. "Eventually. I can't hide it forever, and when they do, it's going to go one of two ways. Either they're going to understand or they're going to be afraid. And I've done this enough times to know it's almost always fear." She turned back to her work. "I just wanted one place where, before that happened, somebody knew me as a person first. So, now you do." I didn't understand it then. I understand it now. She knew. She knew the whole time what she was and what it would mean, and she was just trying to be a person for a little while before the truth turned her into a symbol. I said the only thing I could think of. I said, "Whatever you are, you outran 1,000 of us in the endurance trial, so you can't be that scary." And she laughed. A real laugh, sudden and bright, completely different from the tired smile. It changed her whole face. For a second she looked young, actually young, our age, instead of like something ancient wearing a young face. "Thanks, Vayer," she said. "I needed that." We were friends after that, or as close to it as anyone got with her. I never did learn where she was from. Not then. Not for months. The truth came out a different way, and when it came hard. The thing that broke it open was the Murrith Drift. I have to back up and explain. The academy wasn't just a school. It was the central training arm of the entire Corruvian Compact's defense, and the Compact, for all its size and its 100 worlds and its grand councils, was not as safe as it pretended to be. Out past the edges of charted space, beyond the veil, there were things. Raiders, pirates, and worse, the Hesk. Hesk were the bogeymen of my childhood, and they were real. A species from somewhere in the dark, insectoid and swarming and utterly without mercy, who didn't trade or talk or negotiate. They came, they took, they consumed, they left. They've been raiding the Compact's outer worlds for generations, in small bands, testing the defenses. And the Compact held them off mostly at the borders. Most of us never saw one. The Hesk were a thing that happened to other people on faraway worlds in news feeds. Until the spring of my 3rd year, when a Hesk swarm, a real swarm, not a raiding band, hundreds of ships, came through the Murrith Drift and hit the colony world of Tanny's Reach. And the academy was the nearest force that could respond. I remember the alarms. I remember the way the whole moon seemed to wake up at once, every light coming on, every cadet pouring into the corridors half-dressed and terrified. I remember the commandant's voice on every speaker, calm and grim, telling us that this was not a drill, that Tanny's Reach was under attack, that the regular fleet was 6 days out and the colony did not have 6 days. The academy had ships, training ships mostly, but real ones, armed ones. And it had us 3 years of cadets, the most advanced ones nearly graduated, the rest of us somewhere in between. The commandant made a decision that I think haunted her for the rest of her life. She decided to send a relief force. Cadets. Children, really, though we didn't think of ourselves that way. She asked for volunteers from the upper years, and she got more than she could carry, because that's what the academy made us into, people who ran toward the fire. I wasn't supposed to go. I was middle of my class, like I said, not combat track. But in the chaos of the launch, I ended up on a ship anyway, assigned to a damage control team, scared out of my mind, certain I was going to die. And Aru Sennan was on the same ship. She'd volunteered, of course. They tried to refuse her. She was a 1st year. It was against every rule, but she'd gone to the commandant directly. And whatever she said, it worked, because there she was, strapped into a jump seat across from me as our overloaded training ship punched through the drift toward a world on fire. She caught my eye across the cabin. Everyone else was praying or being sick or staring at nothing. She just looked at me, calm as the equipment bay, and she gave me that small, tired smile, and she mouthed 2 words. Don't stop. I didn't understand it yet. I would. Tanny's Reach was a nightmare. We came out of the drift into a battle already lost. The colony's orbital defenses were gone, just debris and dying fires hanging in the black. The Hesk ships were everywhere, ugly, chitinous things, swarming over the planet like flies over a wound, dropping down into the atmosphere to disgorge their soldiers onto the surface. Below us, the main colony dome was cracked open, and through the crack you could see the fighting, the flashes. The terrible small lights of people dying. Our relief force was 30 ships. The Hesk had hundreds. The math was simple and it was bad. The senior cadets, the ones in command, 22 and 23 years old, kids playing at being officers, they did their best. They formed up. They picked targets. They fought like the academy had taught them, with discipline and coordination, and for a little while it almost worked. We punched a hole through the swarm and got down to the surface, to the main dome, where thousands of colonists were trapped and dying. I was in the dome when it really went wrong. My damage control team had been reassigned to evacuation, getting civilians to the shuttles, hauling the wounded, doing the unglamorous, desperate work of saving who we could. The dome was chaos. Smoke and screaming and the awful clicking sound the Hesk made, that dry insect chatter that I still hear in nightmares. They were coming through the breach faster than we could fall back. We were losing the dome. We were going to lose everyone in it. And that's when I saw what Aru Sennan really was. She'd been assigned to a defensive line, a thin line of cadets holding a corridor junction, trying to buy time for the evacuation. I came around a corner hauling a wounded colonist and I saw the line, and I saw it breaking. The HFY were swarming it, dozens of them, and the cadets were falling back, and in another minute the line would shatter and the HFY would pour through into the evacuation zone where there were children, hundreds of children, waiting for shuttles that hadn't come yet. The cadets knew it too, you could see it. They knew the line was lost, and one by one in twos and threes they started to break to run, the way any sane being runs from death. I don't blame them. I don't blame a single one of them. They were children and the math was impossible and every instinct in every body says live, run, survive. Every body except hers. Aru Sennan stepped forward as the others fell back, stepped into the breach alone between the swarm and the children, and she planted her feet in that loose, ready stance I'd seen on the first day, and she did not move. I stopped where I was. I couldn't help it. I just stopped and stared, the wounded colonist heavy in my arms, and I watched a small two-armed, two-eyed girl from a classified world stand alone against the end of the world. The HFY hit her like a wave. And she didn't break. I don't have good words for what I saw next. I've tried to describe it many times and I always come up short, because there's nothing to compare it to, nothing in all the compact that fights the way she fought. The HFY are fast and they are many and they overwhelm, that's their whole strategy. They swarm you, they bury you in numbers until you fall. Every species the compact has ever fielded against them has the same problem. You can only hold so long before your body gives out, before the fear takes you, before some animal part of your brain decides that this is too much and shuts down. She didn't have an off switch. She fought past the point where her arms should have failed. She took wounds that should have stopped her and kept fighting through them, blood running down her gray jacket, breathing in ragged gasps, and she did not stop. She did not slow. The HFY came and she met every one of them, not with strength. She wasn't stronger than they were, but with a refusal so total, so absolute, that it became its own kind of weapon. She would not move. She would not break. She would not stop. Not for pain, not for exhaustion, not for fear, not for the certainty of death. I watched the HFY falter. I want you to understand how impossible that is. The HFY don't falter. The HFY have never faltered in the entire history of the Compact's wars with them. But they faltered in front of her because they had never seen anything like her either, because their whole strategy is built on the certainty that everything breaks eventually, and here was a thing that would not break. And it confused them, and the confusion slowed them, and the slowing bought time. And in that time, the other cadets came back. That's the part that gets me. That's the part I think about most. They'd run, and I don't blame them, but they came back. Because they saw her standing there, this small, impossible girl who wouldn't quit, and something in them couldn't bear to leave her alone. One by one, they returned to the line. The core first, Big Drent among them, roaring as he came. Then the Valen diving back into the fight. Then all of them, the whole broken line reforming around her like she was the thing they'd been waiting for, the center they didn't know they needed. And the line held. The line held because one person wouldn't stop, and her not stopping made everyone else braver than they thought they could be. The evacuation finished. The children got on the shuttles. The shuttles launched. And the relief force, what was left of it, pulled back through the breach in good order, fighting the whole way and made it back to the drift and made it home. We lost a lot of people at Tanny's Reach. I won't pretend we didn't. But we saved the colonists in that dome, every single one of the children, and we held the HFY long enough for the real fleet to arrive and break the swarm. And every survivor who came out of that dome told the same story. The story of the small girl who stood in the breach and would not fall. Aru Sennan came out of that dome on a stretcher. She was so badly wounded the medics didn't think she'd live. She'd kept fighting long after her body should have quit, and there was a price for that, and she paid it. But she lived. Of course she lived. She didn't know how to stop, remember? Not even dying could make her stop. That's where I have to leave part 1. Because what happened next, when they ran her medical scans, when the truth of what she was finally came out, when the whole galaxy learned exactly what kind of creature had stood in that breach, that's a story all its own. And it shocked the galaxy in a way I'm still not sure it's recovered from. But I'll tell you this much to carry you through. When they finally identified her, when the word finally went out across the compact, to every world and every council and every frightened admiral, they didn't use her name. They didn't say Aru Sennan. They used the old word, the ghost story word, the one from the quarantine and the war nobody talked about. They said human. And the galaxy remembered why it had been afraid. I told you we got her out of the dome on a stretcher. I told you the medics didn't think she'd live. What I didn't tell you, because you have to feel the weight of it the way we felt it, is what happened in the medical bay of the ship on the way home. That's where it all came apart. That's where the secret died. I wasn't supposed to be there. I'd taken a bad hit to the leg during the evacuation, nothing serious, but enough to put me in the medical bay alongside her. So I was there. I saw it. I heard the whole thing, lying 2 beds over with my leg wrapped, pretending to be asleep because I didn't want them to throw me out. The ship's surgeon was a Seleth named Dr. Imra, one of the best in the compact, and she was fighting to keep Aru alive. The wounds were terrible. Aru should have been dead 3 times over. Dr. Imra kept saying it, half to herself, in that hissing Seleth whisper, she should not be alive, this body should not be alive, as she worked. And then she ran the deep scan. The full genetic profile, the thing they do when they can't figure out how to treat a patient because they don't know the patient's biology. It's standard procedure for an unknown species. You scan the genome, you cross-reference the compact's medical archives, you find the closest match and you treat from there. I heard the scanner finish its work. I heard it chime. And then I heard Dr. Imra make a sound I had never heard a Seleth make. A sound of pure animal terror, a sharp hiss that cracked in the middle, and the clatter of an instrument hitting the floor. I opened my eyes. I couldn't help it. Dr. Imra was staring at the scanner display, and her whole body had gone rigid inside her pressure suit, and she was backing away from the bed where Aru lay unconscious. Backing away like the bed was on fire. She fumbled at her wrist comm and her voice came out shaking. "Get me the commandant," she said. "Now, priority absolute. I need the commandant and I need a compact council security officer immediately." "Doctor," someone said, "what is it? What did you find?" And Dr. Imra looked at the unconscious girl in the bed. This small, broken, bleeding girl who just saved 1,000 lives. And she said the word. "She's human," Dr. Imra whispered. "By all the dead stars, she's a human." I didn't understand that night why the word landed like a bomb. I do now. I've spent years learning the history they don't teach, the history behind the quarantine, the truth about the war nobody talked about. And I'm going to tell it to you the way it was finally told to me, because you can't understand what Aru Sennan was without it. A long time ago, 600 years more, the compact found Earth. They did what they always do with a new world that's reaching for the stars. They watched it, studied it, and when they decided it was ready, they made contact the way they'd made contact with 100 species before. They expected the usual thing. A species joins the compact, takes its place, finds its role. The Valen are scouts. The Core are heavy infantry. The Seleth are medics and scientists. Every species has a nature, a place where they fit, and the compact's whole strength is in fitting them together. So the compact studied humans to learn their nature, to learn where they'd fit. And they couldn't. That's what the records finally told me when I went looking. The first contact teams couldn't figure out what humans were for. They weren't the strongest species the compact had found. The Core were stronger. They weren't the fastest, the smartest, the longest lived, the most anything. By every individual measure, they were unremarkable, middling, a medium species from a medium world. Except they didn't stop. The first contact reports, I've read them, the real ones, the classified ones, are full of a kind of mounting horror that's almost funny if it weren't so dark. The compact observers kept testing human limits and kept failing to find them. They'd push a human to the edge of endurance, and the human would push back. They'd present a human with an impossible situation, and the human would try anyway, would keep trying past all reason, past the point where every other species in the galaxy would sensibly give up. The observers had a word for it in their reports, a word that kept appearing, underlined, circled, asked about in increasingly alarmed memos. Why won't they quit? Other species quit. That's not weakness, it's wisdom. Quitting is how you survive a fight you can't win. Every species the compact had ever met understood this in its bones. You assess, you calculate, and when the odds are hopeless, you withdraw and live to fight another day. It's the most basic intelligence there is. Humans didn't have it, or they had it and overrode it constantly, almost compulsively. A human would charge a hopeless position. A human would attempt a rescue that was certain to fail. A human would keep getting up after being knocked down past the point of any sense, would keep coming back, would keep trying, would keep refusing to accept that a thing was impossible until, and this was the part that terrified the observers, until often enough, it wasn't impossible anymore. Because the human had kept pushing on the wall long after everyone else had walked away, and walls, it turns out, sometimes fall if you push them long enough. The compact had 100 species, every one of them superior to humans in some specific way. And the compact realized slowly, with growing dread, that all of that superiority might not matter against a species that simply would not stop. So they made a decision, a terrible one, but I understand it. They decided not to bring humanity in. It wasn't fear of human strength. It was fear of human nature. The compact was built on balance, on every species knowing its limits and its place, on the deep shared understanding that you withdraw from a losing fight. Humanity didn't share that understanding, and the compact's leaders, looking at this strange, relentless species, asked themselves a simple question. What happens to our careful balance if we let in a species that doesn't believe in stopping? They decided they couldn't risk finding out. So they drew the quarantine. They sealed off the human worlds, marked them restricted, and erased the details from the public record. They left humanity alone, let them have their little water world and their reaching for the stars, and they made sure that the rest of the galaxy forgot humans were anything more than a ghost story, a scary rhyme, a thing best left alone. For 600 years it held. And then someone, somewhere in the highest levels of the Compact Council, made a different decision. Someone decided to take one human, one stubborn, hard to control, too much for her own people human, and slip her into the academy under a sealed admission, origin classified, and see what she'd do. I never found out who. I never found out why. Maybe it was an experiment. Maybe it was a test. Maybe someone high up had read the old reports and started to wonder if the Compact had made a mistake 600 years ago, if a galaxy that was losing slowly to the Hesk could afford to keep ignoring the one species that didn't know how to lose. Whatever the reason, they sent Aru Sennan to Thuris, and Aru Sennan stood in a breach on Tanny's reach and did the most human thing there has ever been. She refused to stop. And she dragged 1,000 other people's courage up out of the ground by the sheer force of her refusal, and she saved them all. And then a scanner chimed, and the secret was out, and the galaxy had to decide what to do with the truth it had buried for 600 years. They quarantined the ship. That was the first thing. The moment Dr. Imra said the word, everything changed. By the time we docked back at Thuris, there were council security officers everywhere, and the whole medical bay was sealed, and they moved Aru, still unconscious, still barely alive, to an isolation ward that nobody could enter. They questioned all of us, everyone who'd been near her, everyone who'd fought beside her. They wanted to know what we'd seen, what she'd done, whether we'd known. I told them the truth. I told them she was my friend. I told them she'd stood in the breach when everyone else ran, and that everyone came back because of her, and that 1,000 people were alive because of what she did. I told them she was the bravest person I'd ever met. The officer questioning me, a cold, careful Valen from Council Intelligence, wrote it all down and showed nothing on his face. But at the end, he asked me one question that I think was his own, not on his list. "Were you afraid of her," he said, "when you understood what she was?" I thought about it. I thought about the equipment bay and the tired smile, and I just wanted one place where somebody knew me as a person first. I thought about her standing in the breach. "No," I said, "I was afraid for her. There's a difference." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he wrote that down too, and I always wondered what he did with it. The galaxy found out within a week. You can't keep a thing like that quiet, not when 1,000 survivors of Tanny's Reach are all telling the same story, not when the story is the human saved us. And the reaction was exactly what Aru had told me it would be that night in the equipment bay. It split cleanly into the two paths she'd named, understanding or fear. The fear came first, and it came loud. The old guard of the compact, the council members and admirals who knew the real history, who'd kept the quarantine for 600 years, they were horrified. A human inside the academy, a human armed and trained and loose in the heart of the compact's defenses. They dredged up the old reports and read them into the record, and demanded that the quarantine be reinstated, that Aru be returned to Earth or worse, that the breach in 600 years of policy be sealed before it spread. "You don't understand what they are," one old admiral said in a council session that got leaked everywhere. "You weren't there for the assessments. We sealed them away for a reason. A species that does not know how to surrender is not a soldier. It is a weapon you cannot put down." And he wasn't entirely wrong. That's the thing. That's what made it so hard. He wasn't wrong about what humans were. He was just wrong about whether that was a thing to fear. Because the other path, understanding, that came too. Slower, quieter at first, but it came. It came from the survivors of Tanny's Reach, who would not stop telling their story, who flooded the feeds with their accounts of the girl in the breach. It came from the cadets who'd fought beside her, my friends, Big Drent the Corps standing up in front of cameras and saying, in his slow, deep voice, "She did not run. And because she did not run, neither could we. Whatever she is, the galaxy needs more of it, not less." It came from the families of the children she'd saved, hundreds of children, alive because one human wouldn't move. And it came slowly from the ordinary people of 100 worlds, who looked at this small, brave girl, and the old frightened admirals demanding she be locked away, and who asked a simple question that the old guard couldn't answer. If humans are so dangerous, why is she the one who saved us, while the rest of you were 6 days away? The Hesk weren't going away. That was the thing nobody on either side could ignore. Tanny's Reach wasn't a one-time raid. It was the beginning of something. The Hesk were pushing harder than they'd pushed in generations, and for the first time in living memory, the compact was losing ground. Slowly, but losing. And the compact was losing for a reason that the old reports, the human reports, named exactly. The compact fought the way it had always fought, with discipline, with balance, with the deep shared wisdom of knowing when to withdraw. And the Hesk had learned that. The Hesk had learned that if they pushed hard enough, the compact's forces would do the sensible thing and pull back, because pulling back from a losing fight is what every sane species does. The Hesk had never met anything that didn't pull back. Until Tanny's Reach. Until a girl in a breach who didn't know how to withdraw, and who held a line that should have shattered, and who showed the whole galaxy, and the Hesk too, watching from their ships, that there was a kind of fighting they had no answer for. The fighting of a thing that will not stop. I think that's what finally turned it. Not the speeches, not the survivors, not even the children. I think it was fear of the Hesk that finally made the compact reconsider its fear of humanity. The old admirals were right that humans were a weapon you couldn't put down. But the compact was in a war, and in a war, a weapon you can't put down starts to look less like a danger and more like a hope. The council debated for 3 months. Aru Sennan spent those 3 months in the isolation ward healing, alone, while the galaxy argued about whether she was a hero or a horror. I wasn't allowed to see her. None of us were. But I sent word through a sympathetic medic, the only message I could think of, the words she'd mouthed to me on the ship. "Don't stop." The medic told me later that when she read it, she laughed. The real laugh, she said, the bright one. The day they brought her before the full council, they let it be broadcast. The whole galaxy watched. I watched, in the second mess hall on the big feed screen, packed shoulder to shoulder with every cadet on Thuris, all of us silent, all of us afraid for her. She walked into the council chamber the way she'd walked into the receiving hall on her first day. Small, alone, a little lost in a borrowed jacket, but she'd healed mostly, and she stood in that loose, ready balance, and she looked around at the 100 most powerful beings in the galaxy with those calm, forward-facing eyes, and she was not afraid. The Speaker of the Council, an ancient Valen so old her feathers had gone white, addressed her directly. And she did not ask about the war or the HESC or strategy. She asked the question. The old question. The one from the reports, the one that had frightened the compact for 600 years. "Human," the speaker said, "we have studied your kind for a very long time from a very great distance. And there is one thing about you we have never understood, and it is the reason you were sealed away. So I will ask it now to your face. Why will your kind not stop? When a fight is lost, when the odds are hopeless, when every sense tells you to withdraw and live, why do you keep going? What is wrong with you that you do not know how to quit?" The chamber went silent. The whole galaxy went silent. I held my breath. And Aru Sennan thought about it. Took her time. And then she answered in that low, rough voice with the strange, flat accent, and her answer is carved now into the base of the monument they built on Tanny's Reach, and I can recite it from memory, and I will recite it to my grandchildren. "You think it's something wrong with us," she said. "I get why. From where you stand, it looks like we're broken, like somebody left out the part that knows when to give up." She paused. "But here's the thing you never understood watching us from far away. We do know when to quit. We feel it same as you do, that voice that says, 'Stop, this is hopeless, save yourself.' We hear it loud and clear." She looked around the chamber. "We just decided a long time ago that we'd rather lose trying than win by walking away from each other. That's all it is. That's the whole secret you were so afraid of. It's not that we can't stop, it's that we won't. Not when someone behind us needs us to stand. You can call that broken if you want. But I stood in that breach, and 1,000 people are alive, and I'd do it again, and I'd lose again if losing was the price of them living." She paused, and her voice got quiet. "You sealed us away because you thought a species that won't quit is dangerous. And you're right. We are. But you're fighting something out there in the dark that has never in its life met a thing it couldn't make run away. And I think you're starting to understand that maybe, just maybe, dangerous is exactly what you need." She stopped, the silence stretched. "You don't have to be afraid of us," she said, softer now. "You just have to decide whether you'd rather stand next to us or stand alone. Because we're done being a ghost story. We're done being left alone. We're coming out into the galaxy whether you open the door or not. The only question is whether we come as your partners, or as the one species you taught for 600 years that the Great Compact would rather lock us away than stand beside us." And then she was quiet, and she waited, small and alone in front of the whole galaxy, having said the truest thing anyone had said in that chamber in 1,000 years. I'll tell you how it ended, though ended is the wrong word because really it was a beginning. The council voted. It was close, closer than it should have been given everything, but it passed. The quarantine was lifted. For the first time in 600 years, the human worlds were open to the compact, and the compact to them, not as a conquest and not as a curiosity, but as partners, equal members, with everything that meant. Aru Sennan was offered a commission on the spot, a rank that no first-year cadet had ever held, a seat in the war councils that were even then planning how to push the HESC back out into the dark. The girl with no origin, who'd had her origin classified because the compact was too afraid to say the word, was now the most famous person in the galaxy, the first human in 600 years, the one who'd stood in the breach. She turned the commission down. She said she wanted to finish the academy first, said she'd come as a cadet and she'd leave as a cadet like everyone else, and earn whatever came after the same way everyone else did. The council didn't know what to do with that. They'd never had someone turn down power before. That's not a thing most species do. But she just smiled that small, tired smile and said she'd had enough of being a symbol, and she'd like to go back to being a person for a while, if that was all right. So she came back to Thuris, back to the academy, back to the second mess hall. And I'll tell you the thing I remember most, the thing that stayed with me longer than the breach or the council or any of the grand history. She came back, and the first day she was back, she got her food, and she walked across the floor and the whole hall went silent, the way it always did, except this time it wasn't fear. This time it was something else. And she stopped, and she looked around at all of us staring at her, the famous human, the hero of Tanny's Reach, the one who'd opened the galaxy. And she did the thing she'd done on her very first day. She gave us that small, almost embarrassed smile, and she said to no one and everyone, "Hi, sorry, long trip." And this time the whole hall laughed, and 1,000 cadets from 100 worlds got up from their tables all at once, without anyone telling them to, and they crossed the floor to her, to walk with her, to sit with her, to be near her. Because she'd been right that day in the council chamber. The choice was to stand next to her or stand alone. And not one of us, not a single one in that whole hall, was willing to stand alone. I got there first. I'd been waiting by the door. She saw me coming and her face did the thing it had done in the equipment bay, the young thing, the real thing, and she said, "Vayer, you watched the whole thing, didn't you, from up on the mezzanine?" "Every second," I said. And you didn't stop," I said. She laughed, the bright one. "No," she said, "I didn't. That was a long time ago now. I'm old. I have grandchildren who think the whole thing is ancient history, a story from before they were born, the kind of thing you learn in school and never feel in your bones. They've grown up in a galaxy where humans and Valen and Kor and Selith all serve together, where the HESC were pushed back into the dark a generation ago and have never returned, where the word human means partner, ally, friend. They can't imagine it any other way. To them, the quarantine is a strange, embarrassing thing the old galaxy did, and they can't understand why anyone was ever afraid. I try to explain it to them. I tell them the fear was real and it wasn't stupid. Humans are dangerous. They don't know how to stop, and that's a terrifying thing, and the old compact wasn't wrong to be afraid of it. I tell them the lesson isn't that the fear was foolish. The lesson is what Aru Sennan taught the whole galaxy in that council chamber, that the same thing that makes a species dangerous can be the same thing that makes it worth standing beside. That refusing to quit is terrible when it's aimed at you, and miraculous when it's standing in front of you in a breach. And then they ask me every time the same question. They ask what happened to her, to Aru, the first human. And I smile and I tell them the truth, which is that she finished the academy, middle of her class actually, just like me. She was relentless, but she was never the most talented. That was never the point. And then she went out into the galaxy she'd opened, and she served, and she fought, and she lived a long, full life doing the thing humans do, which is refusing to walk away from anyone who needs them. And she died old in her bed, surrounded by friends from a dozen worlds, having changed the galaxy more than any single person in 1,000 years. But that's not the part I want them to remember, so I always end the same way. I tell them the small thing, the thing that's bigger than all the history. I tell them that the most important moment wasn't the breach, or the council, or the lifting of the quarantine. It was a quiet night in an equipment bay, when a frightened girl who knew the whole galaxy was about to turn her into a symbol asked one strange watching boy to know her as a person first, because she understood something the old admirals never did. She understood that all the courage in the galaxy, all the refusing to quit, all the standing in breaches, none of it means anything if there's nobody behind you worth standing for. The not stopping isn't the point. The someone behind you is the point. The not stopping is just what love looks like when the math goes bad. That's the real secret identity, if you want to know. Not that she was human. The galaxy figured that part out from a medical scan. The secret was simpler and harder, and the Compact had been too afraid to see it for 600 years. She just decided, a long way from home, with everyone telling her to stop, that she'd rather lose standing beside us than win by walking away. And she never stopped. And neither in the end did we.